I hope you're here. It's been a while. Sorry guys, I have not been feeling well. What I'm gonna do now is read to you guys. I've been wanting to read this for a while. On the community tab, I shared the intro that I read from this book a while back. I do believe it's relevant to current events, so I'm kind of jump right into it. Some of this you may have heard before, but I'm willing to wager that a lot of these connections maybe you've not made before. I will show you the book. I'm reading from an actual book today, and so there are some illustrations and whatnot that I'll show you, kind of like back when we used to have people read to us in elementary school. So hopefully you can kick back, relax, and just have a cup of coffee or just listen as you go about your morning. I have been sick. I would appreciate your patience with me. I have combined some Eastern and Western types of medicine. No part of this is any medical advice. This is just me telling you about my testimony and what I do to feel better. I always seek your own expert opinion on such matters. So now that that's out of the way for the rest of this video. I think that this has a lot to do with current events, and I think that this might shine a light on some stuff for some of us. So I'm going to kind of jump right into it. I'll show you the book. Now, some of it will definitely be, I hate this word, but some of it will be triggering for some of us in a variety of different ways. So let's all just be adults and be kind, and let's try to reserve judgment upon each other and just see what we can learn here. So this is the book. It's part 1 in a trilogy. It's called Sinister Forces, A Grimoire of American Political Witchcraft. Book 1, The Nine. Now I know people are gonna be like, that's a wild title. The idea behind, the premise behind these basically is that with the founding of America, like this is the general idea, that with the founding of America, that politics itself is a type of religious cult, if you will. And I think that this is very relevant to current times. So let's just jump right in. It's by Peter Levenda. As you can see, the artwork, book 1. And we're going to go right to section 2. Now you're going to say, why are you doing this? Because that's what I do. And I consider this my work. And I don't work out of the home right now for a paycheck, but I do feel like that I am part of society, and I have helped participate in wickedness when I was ignorant and unknowing. And now that I do know better, I need to go forward and try to just do better and try to help people in whatever way I can. So enough about me. We're going right to chapter 4. It's part 2 of the book. And I'm going to show you, there's some really cool artwork in here. And it definitely gives you an idea of where a lot of this is coming from. Now, if you see the top, the devil appears in many guises in culture and in art, in the above drawing by 17th century illustrator Bartolomeo Pinelli. Satan commands his demons and evil beings. In the below drawing by Gustav Diaz, there is the contemplative fallen angel Lucifer from Dante's Divine Comedy. So some really cool artwork. Now, again, we're not reading this for sake of fear. Real quick, I was in fight or flight for when a lot of this kicked off in 2018 for a steady 2 years, at least till 2020. When everybody else was coming into a state of fear, I was kind of learning how to navigate these waters, and I just want to pass on coping mechanisms to you guys, because fight or flight, if you can't fight or flight, a lot of times what will happen is, and again, this is not medical advice, this is from lots of study and research, do your own research, but what will happen is when you don't have a choice of fight or flight, you will disassociate. I couldn't do that. I did not have that choice. So I wish I was as thin and hot as Sigourney Weaver, but thank you. I didn't have that choice, right? And I did not want to disassociate because I've been down that road. A lot of us were raised in trauma, especially Gen X. But this will explain a lot of that for the younger generations that are unaware, and for people that, like myself, you just didn't have time. You thought you were doing the right thing. You thought you're protecting your family. You thought you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing, but you didn't realize where you really were. So, Section 2, Agents of the Devil. To sustain the quote-unquote, and now he always starts the chapters with some quotes. To sustain the master race in its war-making, they enslaved millions of human beings and brought them into Germany, where these hapless creatures now wander as, quote-unquote, displaced persons. Now let me also say, just because I'm reading this book doesn't mean I agree with everything in it. I've not read the whole thing yet. You're an adult. You need to decide what you're going to accept, receive, and believe. The last thing I want to say before jumping into this is spiritual warfare. If you know anything about natural law, we will not see an end to people dying by the sword. If you live by the sword, you will die by the sword. We will not see an end to war until everyone puts down their swords. If you won't stop participating in certain parts of the system for the sake of others, then do it for self-preservation. If you are out there participating in death, it will come to you in that way. So until we put down our swords and turn them into plows again, we will continue to lose our men, women, and children to diabolical acts like war. Okay, so at length, bestiality and bad faith reached such excess that they aroused the sleeping strength of imperialized civilization. Its unified efforts have ground the German war machine to fragments, but the struggle has left Europe a liberated yet prostrate land where a demoralized society struggles to survive. These are the fruits of the sinister forces that sit with these defendants in the prisoner's dock. What makes this inquest significant is that these prisoners represent sinister influences that will lurk in the world long after their bodies have returned to dust. That's a quote, Robert Jackson's opening statement at the Nuremberg trial. Emphasis was added. Here's another quote. Do you know which way technology is headed? It is headed for the metaphysical. This is true. Radio waves are no longer anything concrete. Wireless is already a highly abstract technique. The transmission of pictures infringes on the realm of religion. The extermination weapons are a point of contact with the universe. The physical world has its boundaries. Only the psychic is oceanic. As the author of Civilization and Its Discontents puts it, this is why mankind's next bold step must be the materialization of the psychic. That's a quote by General von Grihan, in Agent of the Devil by Hans Habe. Now, this shows you how steeped in the occult the German mindset was and where they thought that the war machine of our society and our civilization was headed. Hi, guys. Thank you for being here. And I do have a cough drop in, and I do have to take sips. This is Chapter 4, Unholy Alliance, Nazism, Satanism, and Psychological Warfare in the U.S., and here we have some lovely pictures. This is triggering for me because I've talked to you about this before, about doubles. And one of these individuals looks like my spouse's nephew. And I'm seeing a lot of that, like these people that play alternate parts. And it's disturbing. And why? How could they still be around? Good question. Adolf Hitler and some of his World War II successors. Mengele. Mengele was Project Paperclip. If you don't know the name, you should familiarize yourself with it because we are dealing with the fallout of operations like Project Paperclip today. This is from the trilogy Sinister Forces, A Grimoire of American Political Witchcraft. This is book 1. It's called The Nine by Peter Levenda. He's also the author of a book called Unholy Alliance. And now this is chapter 4, which is section 2, Unholy Alliance, Nazism, Satanism, and Psychological Warfare in the U.S. The secret services of all nations are directed or influenced by personalities which are marked by a criminal, a perverted, a criminal pathological, or in any case, an exceedingly vulgar imagination. But the worst perversion of the secret services, and how could there be a worse one, is that of human sacrifice. Agent of the Devil, Hans Habe. On New Year's Day, 1969, the petite body of Marina Elizabeth Habe was found nude at the bottom of a ravine off Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles, about 4 miles from home. I'm sorry, I just got the chills. You'll see on the community tab, since I've been sick, I've been like in the true crime genre and David Lynch. And Mulholland Drive is a movie by David Lynch. And I was just looking it up last night to watch it. I've never seen it. And I didn't pick this ahead of time. Like I just, this morning, decided like I needed to. Anyways, I'm going to keep going. The 17-year-old student at the University of Hawaii, an aspiring actress, was the victim of multiple stab wounds in the neck and chest and had been accosted, set afire, and had contusions in her eyes. Now, again, there are true crime channels. This is not labeled as a child's channel, so I just want to make that stuff stellar, crystal clear. It was a savage attack, reminiscent of the later attack on Darwin Scott in Ashland, Kentucky. Now, they have a whole section on Ashland here. So again, you have to understand the reason that America has these names like Devil's Hill and Devil's Cauldron was because of fear. Yes, people wanted to keep their children out of certain spots so that they wouldn't go missing, they wouldn't have things happen to them. But it wasn't all born of this satanic panic. How could millions of people have the same delusion pre-internet days? Millions of children, thousands, hundreds of thousands. How could they all have the same delusions? It's not possible unless they're seeing something based in a shared reality. Okay. She had been returning from a date with friend John Hornberg in Brentwood Brentwood, that's where Nicole Simpson died too. The early morning of December 30th, 1968. And you'll see that too. These same places seem to have these same types of, it gets a spirit of its own, right? It takes on a story of its own. And the psychological aspect obviously is fear. But there's something more. There's an energy to these places once something happens, you know? Spell the last name, trying to look, see if I can buy this book. The link is in the description box. It is Peter Levenda, Levenda. Sorry. If I'm not in the chat, I apologize. I don't want to get too far off track, so we can get through at least, a chapter or two. Okay, so she had been returning on the from a date with John Hornberg in Brentwood on December 30th, 1968, which we know is a big occult day. Was kidnapped in front of the home she shared with her mother in the Hollywood Hills after returning from a night out on Santa Monica Boulevard. The case remains unsolved, but there was a lot of speculation at the time that the killer was a Manson family member, since she was known to have befriended various members of the group. Manson himself has no alibi for the day and time of her death and is known to have been in LA on the day she was kidnapped and killed, attending a New Year's Eve party at the home of musician John Phillips of the Mamas and Papas. Phillips himself is known to have been friendly with elements of the Process Church of the Final Judgment, which we've done videos on. You're welcome. Thank you so much. The day before and the day after the killing, Manson was with his family at the Barker Ranch, which was located in the Panamint Mountains of Death Valley. My mom has a history with California, so again, some of this is going to be hard for me to read too. A reference to this crime is buried deep within Vincent. Oh, and understand too, like witchcraft back in the day, it was understood that film and music and I don't know how to explain this in a non-metaphysical way, tape, actual magnetic tape, analog tape, cassettes. You combine these things, the power of the word, the power of the pen, where the pen is mightier than the sword, and then you put it into a visual art form, and you have a powerful recipe for hoodoo, voodoo, witchcraft, Santeria type of, and now again, it doesn't take the place of an actual ritual. And it is my belief that a lot of the movies we're seeing now, a lot of these found footage are the new versions of snuff films. You don't have to agree with me. Watch enough of them, you'll see what I mean. You never see those people again. These new kids and new stars and these found footage. They're in one thing and that's it. A reference to this crime is buried deep within Vincent Bugliosi's book on the Manson case, Helter Skelter, and has a bit more space in Ed Sanders, The Family. Marina Habe, I don't know if you say Habe or Habe, it's Habe, is identified as the daughter of writer Hans Habe. There was no more information on this unfortunate victim or her father, so recourse was had to newspaper morgues, libraries, archives, and eventually to all Holocaust survivor materials. In watching a lot of this stuff recently, again, with the true crime genre, I have to say that some of the stories and some of the people, they are put out just for the sake of fear and just to send certain messages to other cult members. The names that they use, the places where they happen, they can't leave a paper trail. That's what chain letters used to be. I never understood why my mom was so obsessed with chain letters. Oh, you gotta send it back, Jen. You gotta. I never did. But also on Facebook, if you say don't send them things back, these people, they get angry at you for not doing that. And again, we're in a really demented place. Anyways, a lot of this is going to be kind of triggering, but you have to understand, you have to take your emotionality out of it, and you have to understand that some of it is, again, just to send a message. Some of them aren't real cases, and that takes discernment, and again, taking that emotional human interest part, that's where they really want you, right? Just like with Charlie. It's all about your emotions. It's all about getting you invested in the human interest story, and then they can sway you and move you and manipulate you without you even realizing it. The best prisoner is a prisoner who doesn't realize they're a prisoner. The best slave is the slave who doesn't recognize that they're a slave, because you will never try to revolt. My French history taught me a lot more than I ever realized. My dad would probably be impressed. Okay, what developed was the story of a remarkable man and his mysterious life, one that stretched from the concentration camp to the Hollywood film studio, and from Madison Avenue to Munich. Now, again, you'll start to see, it's not just me, you'll see how these things are connected. According to a small paragraph in Current Biography 1977, the Arab died. He was born on February 12, 1911. Okay, according to a small paragraph in Current Biography 1977, the Arab died. He was born on February 12, 1911. He was an editor and a correspondent in the 30s for the newspapers in Austria and Czechoslovakia, and eventually served with the Allies in World War II. He died in Locarno, Switzerland on September 29, 1977, allegedly. Current Biography 1943, published at the height of the war, was much more effusive and detailed. Hobb rated 3 full pages in that edition, where we learned that he was born Jean, actually Janos, Bekesi in Budapest, Hungary. Oddly, the article does not state why or when Jean Bekesi became Hans. Gee, do you see the agenda there? And that's transition. That's from male to female. Or I'm sorry, female to male. Okay, perhaps one is supposed to believe that Hans Hobb is simply a nom de plume, a pseudonym easier on American eyes and ears than Bekesi, but there is more to the story than that. Hans' father, Emmer Bekesi, was also a journalist, but in his case, a yellow journalist and an extortionist. Ooh. A converted Jew, Emmer Bekesi's specialty was convincing public figures to pay him money in order that their names would be kept out of articles. And again, you'll see this for the ones who impersonate the victims, and they're doing it now. They're moving into Ukraine. These people who say that they are, but are not. They call it the synagogue of Satan in the Bible. Now, here's the other thing. The Talmud, okay, Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, they recognize 8 genders. So do you see yet? It is a religion. It is all a religion, and they are indoctrinating the entire public to it. Go back to Rome, Greece, Egypt, it's all the same. They just rebranded it, right? Marketing. Market it to a new generation every time. Okay, moving on, sorry. For these outrages, an Austrian court decided he was persona non grata, and Emmer found himself expelled from Vienna and on the streets of Hungary trolling for new prey. So he was an extortionist, he blackmailed people, and that's what a lot of those people do. That's why they have the money they have. And I told you, the way they're blackmailing people now, and they have been since the 60s, is there are already cameras in your homes. There have been since the Nixon era. That's what Watergate was. Watergate was disclosure. People wait for this big billboard to be taken out and be like, hey, this is disclosure. No, 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 that's not how they do it. Watergate was to tell you that you're all, if the president can be tapped, you think you're not monitored and watched? You know, it's real easy to figure out once you have all the pieces to the puzzle. But we were all fooled. Okay, so he's on the streets now, and it says the name of Bekele became so notorious that his son, Janos Bekele, was forced to become someone else, anyone else, if he wanted a career in journalism, and thus Hans Hab was born. A prominent Austrian journalist and social activist, Hans Janicek, has informed the author that Hab name comes from the first two letters of the first and the last name Hans Bekele. Hans is the Germanization of Janos. Readers of Unholy Alliance may remember another Viennese journalist with the same ambitions as Bekele, Herschel Steinschneider, who became Hitler's occult advisor, Hanussen. So they all changed their names. Okay, so I'm sorry, that was a transition so that they wouldn't know their ethnicity. Like Emir Bekele, Hanussen began his career extorting money from Viennese celebrities. Sound familiar, guys? P. Diddy, anyone? Being paid to keep their names out of his newspapers. And P. Diddy's the fall guy. Like, again, understand that there's cameras everywhere. They have to tell you something so that you don't figure it out. Watch Dateline, like, for a whole day. Do nothing but binge on those shows. I listened to one the other day, and it was talking about how a man had actually recorded himself talking to the bodies while he disposed of them, and that he taped himself. Okay, either he was an author and he was writing a story, or that's just what they're telling people because people are dumb and people don't pay attention to details that way. And that's where they get you. People are more interested in the human interest part, the emotionality, than they are the actual facts. And you know, they get us all that way. Okay, so they changed their names, and he was Jewish, and he had set his sights on Berlin. Thus, Hanussen moved from Vienna to Berlin, so Bekele moved from Vienna to Budapest. Eventually, his son, Hans Hab, would move back to Vienna and become the youngest chief and editor in Europe. So you see, again, how the media is staying in the hands of the same families. So that's basically what we're learning here. As hostilities began with the ascension of Hitler and the Nazi Party to a position of control within Germany, Hab found himself becoming a dedicated, some would say rabid, anti-Nazi. It is to Hans Hab, in fact, that we credit the discovery of Hitler's Schickelsgruber family background. I guess that's a name. As war broke out, Hab found himself on Hitler's enemy list. His books were burned, and he was ended by firing squad in Vienna because of his publication of Hitler's Schickelsgruber ancestry. Okay, Hab actually sent copies of his report to Germany at the time of Hitler's campaign against Hindenburg in an effort to ridicule Hitler and cause him to lose the election, a tactic which was in vain, as we all know. Hab enlisted with a group of foreign volunteers in the French army and took part in the Battle of France. He was captured on June 22nd, 1940, armed only with an 1891 Remington rifle. Hab, in his book about the experience, A Thousand Shall Fall, rails against the French complicity in the defeat, accusing the Vichy hierarchy of actually wanting to surrender rather than fight Germany, which is also a pattern. You'll see that. But again, in the game of war, it used to be a lot more civilized than it is today, and even now, it's more civilized than they show you. Everything's done with drones. So a lot of what you see on television is still very archaic and ancient technology. I mean, they have people here fooled with like spotlights in the sky and stuff. And over in China, they've been doing drone firework displays for a decade now. I feel so bad for us. I really do. Okay, so we're going to move along with this background here. Okay, so he was held at a prison camp in occupied France. Hab managed to survive for a few weeks under an assumed name before escaping dressed in a German uniform and fleeing in an ambulance. He eventually made his way to Spain, Portugal, joining his wife, Erica Levy, in neutral Lisbon. President Roosevelt gave Hub a special emergency visa, and the couple arrived in New York Harbor on December 3rd, 1940. A deeper examination of the available records showed that American rescue worker Varian Fry was instrumental in getting Hans Hub out of Europe. Recourse to the archives of the International Rescue Committee in New York shows that Varian Fry went to France in 1940 after the Fall of Paris to help intellectuals escape the Gestapo. For over a year, Fry managed to rescue thousands of refugees, eventually becoming the first American ever honored by the Yad Vashem organization in Israel, where a tree was planted in his name by Secretary of State Warren Christopher on February 2nd, 1996. Among the people he helped escape were such famous personalities as Marc Chagall, Franz Werfel, Hannah Arendt, Fritz Kahn, Otto Meyerhoff, Conrad Hayden, the Hitler biographer, Arthur Koestler, and of course Hub. In addition, credit must be given to Varian Fry for saving nearly the entire Surrealist movement: André Breton, Marcel Duchamp, Max Ernst, and André Masson. Fry was eventually expelled from France in 1941. He died in 1967 as a retired teacher in Reading, Connecticut. His exploits on behalf of the refugees largely unknown and unrecognized in his own country at the time. Indeed, when he was expelled from France, it was due to the fact that the U.S. consul in Marseille had refused to renew his passport. Fry's wife received a letter from Eleanor Roosevelt saying, in essence, that Fry's expulsion from France was inevitable, as his actions did not have the support of the U.S. government, the same government which 5 years later would be helping Nazi war criminals emigrate to the United States to assist in the space program and in intelligence activities against the Soviet Union, or against PSYOPs against their own American people, in Project Paperclip. Which, again, if you don't know about that if you learn about Project Paperclip, you'll understand kind of how a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with now has been set into motion and how it started. Okay. Then the Hans Hub story gets even more interesting. In an attempt to find out more about Hub, the author accessed the Amazon.com website and found that his works were all out of print. They had a few secondhand copies in stock, however, and Agent of the Devil was selected, a novel Hub published in 1958. The book arrived a short while later, and in one of those eerie coincidences that haunted the research for this book constantly for years, kind of like the eerie coincidence we just had about Mulholland Drive, there was an old news clipping taped inside the front cover of the book. I've gotten a lot of books like that. Somebody, when all this stuff started, left me a book of the history of France, and it was on my back patio outside with a lot of stuff about the Pope. I understand Project Paperclip. Yeah, it's heinous. It's heinous what's been done to people, especially children, but as a whole, against people's consent and knowing, against people's knowledge. Sorry. Okay, so he had this was taped inside the book. It was a review of Agent of the Devil by BD, and it contained this illuminating sentence. Budapest journalist and U.S. Army psychological warfare officer on the Italian front, Hans Hub, is a cunning writer. Psychological warfare officer, Italian front. The news clipping gave the author a further dimension for his research and also suggested a new line of inquiry. Let's see where it leads us. Wow, so he had a clue arrive in a book he ordered. That's crazy. Hub began giving talks at various clubs and societies in America during 1941, even staying for a while at West Point, where, it is said, he continued to work at his writing. In 1942, he began a series of lectures at Army bases under the aegis of the War Department's Bureau of Public Relations on How to Lose a War, an ironic title which took its text, The Fall of France, and served as motivation for the American troops in their struggle against Nazism. Hub was busy in 1942 with other interests as well. He divorced Erica Levy after 8 years of marriage and married Mrs. Eleanor Close Sturgis Gautier Rand. Gautier, like the watch company. The aggressively nomenclatured former wife of that great comic film producer and screenwriter Preston Sturges, and the daughter of Mrs. Marjorie Post Hutton Davies, the General Foods heiress, and former wife of the U.S. ambassador to Russia, Joseph E. Davies. Wow. One could not ask for a spouse with a more blue-blooded and flagrant set of pedigrees. Indeed, the families of Rand, Hutton Gautier, Post Davies, and even old Preston Sturges amply represented every time she signed a check. So she signed her, he's saying every time she signed a check, she used every name. Because, you know, clout. They were married on April 22nd. There's another 22nd. So he was caught on June 22nd with just a Remington rifle, and April 22nd, 422. I told you about the repetition of that number, 22, for this whole Antichrist stuff. Okay. Considering that Erica Levy, Hunt's first wife, was the heiress to the tungstrom light bulb fortune, one has to say that he had a knack for marrying. Perhaps not too wisely, but too well. One story has it that Mrs. Eleanor, etc., Rand had helped Hobb and his wife emigrate to the U.S., and that they fell in love at the time. She seems to have been an older woman, and according to some accounts, rather short on charm, and many suspected that Hobb had married for money and security rather than for love or passion. Gee, do you think? Shortly thereafter, in January 1943, Hobb enlisted in the U.S. Army. This was not mere expedience, since he had dependents and would probably not have been called up, but he asked to enlist anyway. By July of that year, he was in North Africa and the new father of a son, a second lieutenant. He was then loaned to the British General Montgomery for a while. In September, found him in Italy, and this time with the U.S. forces. After that, the record becomes a little confused, and you'll see that as a pattern as well. Some reports have him, a pattern for people in the U.S. as a whole. Like, we don't know where any of us are from at this point, most of us. Some reports have him landing with the Allied forces at D-Day, yet he seems to have entered Europe via Italy 9 months earlier than that. Regardless of the order of events, by that time, Hobb was working for C.D. Jackson, more famous in his Time Life incarnation, and was actively involved in psychological warfare operations which lasted long after the war's end, and which found Hobb in charge of no fewer than 18 German newspapers throughout the Allied territories. So again, you see how the the market is being cornered by one family, and so then they have control of the narrative. It's not hard to have control when you have it's not hard to control the thoughts and the sway of people when you control all those different points of information. I hate gatekeepers, like more than anything. Gatekeepers to God, gatekeepers to information. Like, I understand not everybody is ready for all bits of information, but if somebody knows enough to start seeking it, then you should be able to have it. Seek and you shall find, right? All right. One of those who knew Hobb at this time was Tibor, these names, Sadovsky, a distinguished American economist who was born in Hungary and whose father knew Hobb's father, the yellow journalist, coward, I think is what that means, and threw him out of his office when Bekesi approached him for money when he tried to blackmail him. His memoir, A Proud Hungarian, mentions a psychological warfare school in Gettysburg. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where Sadovsky and others were being trained in propaganda. Propaganda is what you're dealing with right now. If you don't know what it is or how it's achieved, look up Project Mockingbird, which I think he starts talking about here, or in the book anyway. He characterizes Hobb as the U.S. Army's propaganda expert. So what we're learning here is how psychological operations in the U.S. and America were born, and who they were born from, and where they kind of came from. And right from the onset, the media is involved, right? We need a new world. New system. We need to turn our backs on it, and we need to stop participating in it. It's the only way it's going to change. And most people don't want to live uncomfortably. They don't want to go pick food. They don't want to grow their food. They would rather be spoiled. This is why I don't think they're ever going to turn everything all off on us. They want us. Like, you don't need a concentration camp. You got it right in your house. They can get you chubby. They can get you watching whatever propaganda they want. They don't even have to, and you're paying them to do it. See, So that, like, they're harvesting all of your energy too. So, okay, so where were we? I'm sorry. My bad. Here we go. Okay, so this is where he starts being trained in propaganda. He characterizes Hobb as the U.S. propaganda expert in his memoir of the war years and describes how Hobb trained him in spotting important information in the New York Times. What was I just saying? Media literacy, that a lot of the stories, even some of these true crime stories about serial killers, aren't even true. It's them getting on television and passing their messages. Back in the day, it used to be spies and pieces of paper and emails, and they don't want that. They don't want you to be able to trace what they're doing. See? Anyway, and how to use that information for propaganda purposes. They practice making radio broadcasts, writing articles, and filler, meaning fake, designed propaganda posters, and all of it in both French and German. According to Sazovsky, Hobb also had been a student of the Bauhaus, and thus a good eye for artistic composition as well as literature and journalism. Man, he's like the triple threat. Sadovsky, and another thing is, like, actors and celebrity, they can all travel. Like their green cards, their visas, all that stuff's always kept up, and they act kind of like airheads, right? So who else better to be spies and CIA agents than people who influence public opinion? You play their music, you watch them, you listen to them. Actors, CIA, Men in Black, even Mormons, they all dress the same. They all have the same uniform, black suit, white shirt, sunglasses. Are you starting to see the patterns yet? Ugh. I'm sorry, it gets me worked up because it just needs to stop. Like, it's just enough. Everybody, like, you're playing dress up, and they think it's part entertainment for them, but it's part, like, again, illusion. People aren't going to believe that there's something out there to be afraid of if you don't have pictures of it. People aren't going to believe that there's something that they should fear and cower in their homes from unless you have, give a face to the devil or the monster or the serial killer or whatever it may be. That's why they don't care if it's aliens or fallen angels. They don't care which one you believe in, just as long as you're afraid of one of them. They don't care. Now, the fallen ones might actually care, but... Okay, sorry. Sadovsky was eventually assigned to the 4th Mobile Broadcasting Company of the Army and had quite a sophisticated bunch of Army buddies, including Joseph Weisberg of the New York Magazine and Igor Cassini, the gossip columnist and brother of Oleg Cassini. They were sent first to Britain at the time of the V1 and V2 attacks. According to that timetable, they would have been sent over sometime in the mid to late 1944. Thus, Hobb could have been with Allied forces at the Italian front in 43, then returned stateside to conduct PSYOPs classes at Gettysburg, and then returned to Europe with the Allied forces on D-Day in 44. Sadovsky and others did not arrive in Germany until after VE Day in May 45. By that time, they had become part of USSBS, or United States Strategic Bombing Survey. It was created by President Roosevelt in November 1944 to assess the damage caused by the Allied strategic bombing of Europe. Their task was to consider the effects, hold please, on civilian morale and whether bombs hardened the national will to fight or collapsed it. Interesting. In other words, their function was essentially an intelligence one allied to psychological warfare. In the back of Roosevelt's mind must have been the question whether the devastating new atomic weapon being designed by the scientists of the Manhattan Project would cause an earlier end to the war or prolong it indefinitely. By the time Sadovsky and his colleagues were sent to Germany, their task had changed somewhat again. I'm probably saying that name wrong, okay? But I don't want to spend too much time, you know what I mean? Like, I know to be respectful, but I want to get through the book. So it's Scitovsky if you want to do your own research, but Sadovsky. They were on the lookout for specific Nazi individuals to capture and interrogate, and the USSBS became so huge in the process that it eventually found itself under combined military and civilian leadership, including an official of IBM. The Nazis were enthusiastic users of IBM punch card equipment during the war for such tasks as keeping track of concentration camp inmates and their final dispositions. Reminds me of the internet urban legend of John Titor and how he needed that part of the IBM to travel in time. And such luminaries as Kenneth Galbraith, George Ball, and Paul Nietzsche, who would all go on to greater glory in succeeding presidential administrations. Another friend of Hobb at this time is Psy War Officer Alfred de Grazia, now a professor at Princeton, and even more intriguingly, a friend of the late Emanuel Velikovsky, who was with Hobb in North Africa in 1943. His book on the war years makes for very interesting reading as it reveals the Mobile Broadcasting Company was a cover for OSS, Office of Strategic Services, activities in Europe, and that they were joint OSS U.S. Army units. Do you see what I mean? So they're all working behind the scenes. Like it's just war against the citizens. That's all it's ever been. And harvesting of energy and sacrifice. A photograph of Hobb in this collection, taken near Tunis in North Africa in 1943, shows him to look remarkably like the Heinz Hobb figure in Bauer volumes mentioned below. What is even more surprising, especially as a reader of Unholy Lions, is that the shady figure of George Virek once again raises his ugly head. And again, you'll see a lot of these names repeat. I don't even know if it's still, I mean, it is important that you remember them and how they're involved, but their operations and what they're starting at this time is more integral to our knowledge base for what's happening in current events. If I'm being too loud, I apologize. My ear's starting to get kind of funky again. 41. I'll go for another 15 or 20 minutes as long as I feel okay. Okay. Virek was a propaganda officer and spy for the Kaiser during World War I and a colleague of infamous British occultist and sometimes spy Aleister Crowley. Virek went on to conduct espionage and propaganda activities during World War II as well and wound up arrested for his efforts, spending about a year in prison. At the same time, his son, Peter Virek, was working for the OSS and the First Mobile Broadcasting Company in North Africa, along with Hans Hobb and other notables, including Martin Hertz, a future U.S. ambassador. And we should not forget yet another OSS officer in Italy at this time, Peter Tompkins, a broadcast journalist who became an intelligence officer during the war, but whose fame rests more on his researches in two fields: Egyptian archaeology on one hand, and the use of lie detectors and the investigation of the secret life of plants on the other. Wow, and lie detectors are not admissible in court. They are not a science, and again, most people don't even know that. I'll take a lie detector test. Yeah, because you can beat it. That's why you'll take it. It's pseudoscience at best. And it's deception. It's lies, basically. All right. Also involved in intelligence during the war in Europe, and specifically in the interrogation of Nazi prisoners like his counterparts in OSS and USSBS, was J.D. Salinger, the famed and reclusive author of The Catcher in the Rye. Now, The Catcher in the Rye, if you don't know the history, let me just see if they explain it. Catcher of the Rye, the favorite book of American assassins. So, for example, the guy who killed John Lennon, he had a copy of The Catcher in the Rye. So it's allegedly just like kind of how Alice in Wonderland allegedly is to females who are in mind control programming. Catcher in the Rye is to the males who are in Manchurian Candidate / mind control programs. So, yeah, he was a CIC, Counterintelligence Corps officer from 1943 and took part in the D-Day invasion of June 1944. His duties were essentially the same as those of his counterparts: to round up Nazis and interrogate them, and to search for collaborators and German army deserters among the quote-unquote civilians. It also appears that two other gentlemen who will figure into our story, Clay Shaw and Fred Krisman, were involved in similar intelligence activities, specifically with the paperclip operations. This will be discussed in Chapter 7 in more detail. Shaw, as many readers are aware, figured prominently in the Kennedy assassination theories of New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison and others. Krisman, supposedly a friend of Shaw from the war years, was subpoenaed by Jim Garrison to testify concerning that relationship. It has been suggested that Shaw was an OSS officer during the war. Krisman certainly was, as the CIA file demonstrates. Krisman, however, was also involved in the seminal UFO contact of the 20th century. This was the Mare Island Affair of 47, which ushered in the whole UFO spectrum from flying saucers to men in black to government cover-ups and exploding aircraft. I wonder how good I did on guessing where all that comes from and how it all started. There are videos I've done on that as well, if you are interested. As if that weren't enough, another Army intelligence officer in Rome at the time was charged with hunting down Nazi agents like his OSS counterparts, was Philip Corso, who would eventually find a position on Eisenhower's national security staff. It was Corso who, a bit before his death, published the day after Roswell a book claiming that he was privy to reverse-engineered scientific achievements based on captured flying saucers, and he had actually seen the corpse of a being in Roswell. In a shipping crate on its way to Wright Air Force Base, Ohio. A claim that is hotly debated on both sides of the UFO issue, even though Corso's bona fides in all other respects seems unimpeachable. The involvement of intelligence agents in the field of Egyptian archaeology, the UFO phenomenon, and other odd pursuits will be discussed in a later chapter. For now, it suffices to point out that psychological warfare literature, archaeology, and the paranormal not only make for strange bedfellows in the war years of the last century, it was positively, and he uses a word there that I'm not going to use. While de Grazia's account shows that although some OSS personnel were antagonistic towards the dashing Hungarian Hobb, was riding high in the estimation of the U.S. Army Psychological Warfare Bureau, PWB. But in charge of the U.S. Army propaganda in Germany, he was the czar of German newspapers for years after the war, until 1951, according to the information available to the author. Eventually responsible for the publication of 8 million pieces and over 10,000 newspaper articles, not counting 24 novels in his lifetime. You see, I've read stuff like that about Philip K. Dick, too, and my question is, like, are they in prison their whole lives? How do they have time? Like, you wouldn't have time for anything else. You would always be writing. See, and again, I wonder if some of these things that they attribute to, like, one individual or one person is kind of false, if they just attribute it to that person, but it's actually, like, maybe that bureau that, I don't know, it's just weird. It doesn't seem humanly possible. To me, anyways. Okay. Okay, so someone as high profile and as rabidly anti-Nazi as Hobb was a jewel in the Psy-War crown. After all, they made a movie about his life in a Nazi POW camp, the Cross of Lorraine. He was married to the adopted daughter of the former U.S. ambassador to Russia. He was running propaganda and Psy-War ops against the Nazis, and then after the war, against both the Nazi sympathizers and the communists. If the Allied post-war intelligence community was like a corporation, then Hobb had a seat on the board. It seemed logical to the author, therefore, that Hobb would have been involved, if only peripherally, in the effort to identify and capture as many important Nazis as possible, including Nazi scientists. His former students at Gettysburg were doing just that and had managed quite a coup in finding and interrogating Albert Speer, Hitler's architect, among many others. Was Hobb involved with Operation Paperclip, the U.S. effort to bring Nazi scientists, especially rocket scientists, but also medical men and other experts, to America after the war? There is an intriguing and startling photograph in Tom Bauer's Blind Item Murder, an account of the Allied failure to completely denazify Germany after the war. It is labeled Photograph 13, the paperclip scientist, and describes, quote, the men who put America on the moon enjoying a Bavarian evening in Chicago, 1950, end quote. Bavarian evening, Bavarian Illuminati. That's like what that means. Okay, wow. Anyways, yeah. You have to understand that symbolism a lot. Enough of the stuff that you read and go through and information that you gather, you'll start to hear stuff like that too and associate it and know what it means, you know, symbolically speaking. All right. Among the scientists, the notorious physician, and they put that in quotations, Dr. Hubertus Sturghold, Werner von Braun, and General Walter Dornberger. There's another figure identified as Hans Hobb. Hans Hobb does not appear in the text of Bauer's book, nor in the index or anywhere else. The photo certainly looks like Hobb when compared to the De Grazia photo and in current biography, but how could that be? What would Hans Hobb be doing hanging out in apparent conviviality with paperclip scientists? Double agent. Bauer's book was first published in 81. In 87, he published The Paperclip Conspiracy. This book contains the same photographs, only this time the individual originally identified as Hans Hobb is now identified as Heinz Hobb. This person also does not appear anywhere else in the book, but another photograph showing Sturghold's team at Heidelberg shows a Heinz Haber. Unfortunately, there is no further mention of Haber either, even though we know that a Dr. Heinz Haber does make it to the paperclip team in the U.S. after the war. So again, you see how they changed their name. They put one letter different than the others. They changed the middle initial. They use pseudonyms. I mean, this is, again, a pattern that you will see over and over and over again. It's like they create paper dolls for themselves, like these fake personas. But lots of them and variations of the same name over and over. Okay. There is another famous photograph to consider, this one notorious among UFO enthusiasts and debunkers alike. It is of an alien, a short creature in a strange suit, a weird mask with elongated forehead and breathing apparatus, holding hands with an army officer. As another person walks behind carrying his oxygen tank, it first appeared in a German newspaper on April Fool's Day, 1950, and made the tabloid circuit in the States shortly thereafter, in which form the author first saw it as a child years later. This photo would have appeared in one of Hobb's newspapers. It appeared in 1950, and Hobb was in charge of West German propaganda until 51. But whoever was in charge of, like, the alien, like, they don't even look real. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to... They don't look real at all. They look like masks. They don't look like organic beings. Now, there is a theory, and I like to mention this because I think it's... What's her name? Is it Annie Leibovitz? I can't remember her name. There's another theory that what happened to the children from Project Paperclip and things like Montauk, like Stranger Things, is that it was children that were used in these suits because they were the only ones small enough to be in these big-headed, and the reason that they looked like that is because they were malnourished, that they wouldn't feed them. And you know, again, when somebody is empty on the inside, it makes for more paranormal and supernatural goings on. It's easier to induce those types of things to occur. And again, like and anyone who is in comment sections gaslighting like that, saying, oh, you're stupid, you're crazy, this never happened, look, in World War II, Adolf Hitler obviously thought there was something to the occult. There's a reason all of these people flock to it. In some aspect it works, but what they always lose, and what they lose track of, and what I try to always reiterate, is pride. When you get so prideful and you think that there are no rules to bind you, and you start breaking natural law and going against consent and going against other people's free will, then you are things are going to end badly for you. And I don't call it karma. I just call it consequences to the actions. You go against natural law, there's a price to pay. There's always a cost. That's why the Bible says the only thing that there is no law against is love. If you act in love, if you speak in love, if you do something in love, you don't have to worry about any repercussions, or at least not any that are mandated, right? Anyways, moving on. That was one of the theories, was that it was the children from Project Paperclip, Operation Paperclip, who were used for the little black-eyed aliens because they were the only ones small enough, which is dreadful if it's true. Okay, the photo was obviously a hoax and was published that way, tongue-in-cheek reference to the famous Roswell sighting in 47. Whatever the original purpose, one source has published that a photocopy of it was found in FBI files, quote, with the suggestion that it might be one of the Roswell aliens, end quote. In any event, it was published the same year as the Paperclip Scientists in Chicago photo. Hub evidently finished his post-war service in 51, which would have been the same year his daughter Marina was born. Hub returned to the U.S. and left sometime in 53 for Europe, evidently leaving his young daughter behind in America. The only information to hand is that he moved to Locarno, Switzerland at some point and stayed there until he died in 77 at the age of 66. Do we believe that? 1977 and he died in 66? No. He had been through at least 2 more wives by that time, the actress Eloise Hart, Marina's mother, and the actress Lisi Bala. In the meantime, Hub began writing books critical of the United States. One of his more famous efforts, Der Tod in Texas, Death in Texas, an American Tragedy, was an attack on the Warren Commission, published in 64. Hub had been traveling through the U.S. at the time of the assassination and did not believe the conclusions of the Warren Report. He was very fond of Kennedy, but very critical of America in the wake of the assassination and what he perceived as the obvious cover-up efforts by the government and the willingness of the American people to accept the government's findings. Yes, we're too well behaved for our own good. I do not condone violence. I'm a pacifist. But there's a season for all things. Hub, OSS operations, psychological warfare, UFO hoax, paperclip scientists, even the JFK assassination. More or less than meets the eye? In the effort to learn more about Hub, the author found himself going through a list of the contents of C.D. Jackson files of the Dwight D. Eisenhower Library. Jackson was a vice president of Time Incorporated from 31 to 64, the year of his death. But he was much more than that. He was also special assistant to the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, president of the Free Europe Committee, 51 to 52, speechwriter for Eisenhower in 52, special assistant to the president for international affairs from 53 to 54. Okay, this gives all his credits, but we're not gonna. So he's involved in pretty much everything. Jackson had files on the Bilderbergers from 55 to 64. These files include agendas, minutes of meetings, lists of participants at the Bilderberger meetings, even a history of the Bilderberger meetings. Surely a treasure trove for the academically inclined paranoid academic. It was former CIA Director Walter Bedell Smith who asked Jackson to help him recruit members for that mysterious organization, the CIA. It was also C.D. Jackson who arranged the Life magazine purchase of the famous Abraham Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination, thereby keeping it away from the public view for 5 years until the Clay Shaw trial in New Orleans. How would anyone even believe that? After 5 years, just like the Epstein list, who's gonna think that they've had these for this long and haven't altered them, haven't changed anything? Like, it just doesn't even make sense. We are reading Sinister Forces. This is book 1, The Nine, a grimoire of American political witchcraft. It kind of shows you the roots of what we're dealing with today and how we got here. Somebody took their like away. That's so funny to me when people do that. All right, hold 1 second. I'll read for a few more minutes, see how far we get. So this is basically them going over like how psychological, like how the CIA was born, how the psychological operations were born, and the key players in these different groups. Okay. Psychological warfare is an intelligence function. It involves gathering of intelligence on target, generally civilian populations, as well as disseminating propaganda in various forms. But it also has a more lethal function, and this has been discussed at length by the respected historian Christopher Simpson in his excellent and enlightening Science of Coercion, Communication Research, and Psychological Warfare, 1945 through 1960. There he discusses the role Jackson and fellow Bilderberger Nelson Rockefeller played in charge of policy oversight of combined CIA, USIA, U.S. Information Agency, and the U.S. military country plans during the HUK insurrections in the Philippines in the mid-50s. As we saw with the North African memoir of Alfred de Grazia mentioned earlier, the OSS, forerunner of the CIA, so the CIA was called the OSS at first, was heavily involved in the Psychological Warfare Bureau from the very start, running joint operations with the Army in North Africa, Italy, and elsewhere. And you see, Hobb also, not only did he marry, like, these pure, these purebreds, and not only did he have his fingers in all the media in the beginning of psychological ops, but he also married actresses. So again, you have these same people, the same circle, and they all do the same thing, and then they pat themselves on the back. Oh, good job, you got an Oscar because you and we watch them, and we pay to watch them, and it really is quite insane. Like we keep doing these same things over and over and over again, expecting different results, and nothing's going to change until we change our behaviors. All of us. And I just mean that, we can't just say, oh, it's them, they're bad. Well, we need to stop participating. Stop watching them. Stop giving them our attention. Stop tuning in. Don't pay for these bigger channels that, again, they've told you they're military. A lot of them are ex-military. What do you think they're doing on YouTube? Trying to run the narrative and the rhetoric. They want us to pop off. They want to have this revolution so that they can openly have troops, on the, this is what has been wanted. Anyways. Simpson's study, however, goes even further and cites clandestine operations such as sabotage and assassination as functions of the psychological warfare effort. As functions, not just collateral damage or side effects. They're the actual of the psychological warfare effort from the very beginning. For what the establishment considers psychological warfare, the enemy often considers terrorism. These are two sides of the same coin. These operations are not, strictly speaking, military in nature, but have as their goal the psychological disorientation of an enemy population. So it's just to keep us confused. It's just so that we don't organize. That's why they're cutting us off from each other now. That's why they didn't want us gathering at the beginning. The masks are for communism. It's just, I don't know. Sad. We studied all this stuff in school. We didn't learn anything. It's sad. It's really sad. The Nazis had already been working a psy-war system of their own since the 30s when they came into power. Mystic and theosophist Otto Ohlendorf, who would later become a famous SS commando, cut his milk teeth on psychological warfare programs with his own creation. The Deutsche Lebensgift in 1939, before going hunting in the Caucasus looking for Jews and Freemasons and ending 90,000 innocent people in the process. Oh no. Probably the most famous propaganda chief of the war itself was the odd-looking, in-your-face Nazi fanatic Joseph Goebbels. I never know how to say Joseph Goebbels. We're going to call him Goebbels. Most Americans and other allies could not name his opposite number in their own countries. Propaganda was something the other side did. Our side does not use propaganda, the story goes. It merely disseminates factual, truthful information, i.e. fake news, anyone? Meanwhile, propaganda and psychological warfare became synonymous within the U.S. intelligence agencies, and psychological warfare was the province of agencies like the famous OSS or the Army's G2, and therefore operated in a cloak and dagger world of secrecy. This is also another reason allegedly that maybe Kennedy was ended, was because he knew that they were going to start running psyops on the American people, and he was against this. He was going to put an end to that. That's where his last speech come from. That's a little known fact. It's something, again, you can only pick up on if you put all this stuff together and look at it. The connection has been made in obscure places I've seen, but not very often. But we'll see if he hits on that. Probably the most famous propaganda chief was Goebbels. Okay, so we got him. According to Simpson, even the English term psychological warfare did not come into use until 1941 as a manifestation of that marvelous and perhaps more revealing German neologism, Weltanschauungskrieg, or worldview warfare. The term psychological warfare was first appeared in an English language text entitled German Psychological Warfare by a historian who would later become famous as the Hungarian-born author of The Game of the Foxes and Patton. Ladislas Farrago. Farrago's later work, Aftermath, was a crucial factor in the development of this author's first book, Unholy Alliance, according to Simpson. British and Nazi German strategies and tactics in this field have historically been termed political warfare and the W word, or worldview warfare, respectively. Each of these conceptualizations of psychological warfare explicitly links mass communication, like the internet, with selective application of violence, murder, sabotage, assassinations, insurrections, counter-insurrections. January 6th, anybody? As a means of achieving ideological, political, or military goals. Boy, I picked a good one for our current times, didn't I? If nothing else, I seem to connect people with the information they need. Worldview warfare says it all. A battle between our perceptions and those of an enemy population. So they're the ones that are bad. They're the ones that are interpreting wrong. They're the ones. They. Meanwhile, by the way, Venezuela, y'all do know that that's in Call of Duty, right? Like, you have heard that now, right? Because I had kids who played that. Just like I told you that the little ticker that they used for how the V was spreading across the earth was actually a ticker that my son showed me a year before that started in 2019. It was a ticker for the zombie plague, how fast the zombie plague would spread around the earth. Same thing. It's all fake. It's television. We knew this when I was little. It's all fake. They started using terms like fiction and true crime and misnomers. A lot of misnomers. Okay, moving on. Rob, an enemy of their moral justification for fighting, make your way seem the right way, the good way, the best way. Make their way seem bad, wrong, doomed to failure, and you have robbed an enemy of their will to fight. Kind of how the American people are now, exhausted, tired, homeless, not wanting to... Even the most crazed suicide bomber is acting from a belief that what he is doing is right, morally justified, and has the sanction of the people that matter, the people that count, God's people. The best, says the poem, lack all conviction. But rob the worst of their conviction and the war is over. It is tantamount to waking up and finding a voodoo doll on your bed studded with pins, or a horse's head a la Mario Puzo's The Godfather. You've been cursed, you will die, and your mind does the rest. Your mind does the rest. At the beginning of all this, Trump said, it's not going to affect you unless you have a television. That was an odd thing to say in the middle of like an hour-long speech. Pay attention. Listen. Don't just have things on in the background. If you really want to know what's going on, you've got to listen to all their... And it's boring. I know they've got so much filler. But you will hear these certain little things that they say throughout their speeches and then turn it off. Like, just forget it. It's just... Anyway, your mind will do the rest, right? That is the value of psychological warfare, of worldview warfare, and it works, at least just as well as the voodoo doll or the dead horse. In the right hands, one call can kill or influence without firing a shot. Psy-war was never perceived as a substitute for the real thing, but only as a complement to an existing arsenal of weapons. The basic Psy-war techniques are only useful insofar as they make the enemy's soldiers lose faith in the ability of their army and their country to win. One can shake that faith in many ways, by ridicule, by fake prophecies of doom, by appeals to reason or emotion. Another way is through fear. When we speak of psychological warfare, we are often speaking of ways to make the enemy afraid. And in order to do this, we must understand an enemy's psyche. What makes him love, hate, fight, run? We must understand how an enemy will react under stress. This is why I tell TIs, you got to work on maintaining your calm, man. Will he fight harder or will he give up? Will he start making errors in judgment, winning the war for us, in a manner of speaking? The costliest mistakes of psychological warfare operations are always those made in ignorance of an enemy's mindset. Do not underestimate your enemy. Let them underestimate you. The psychological warfare officer must be able to play an enemy's mind like a violin. This implies a deep knowledge of human psychology, which is itself a kind of black art. And since this is a war of perceptions, of worldviews, it is important that the psychological warfare officer understand the impact of art, music, literature, theater, and other cultural modes of expression, and how worldviews are represented by them, even changed or modified by them. Why do you think they're letting it out now that all the sports are rigged? Because they want you weak. They want you not having joy in anything. They don't want you to have joy in anything anymore. They want you to give up. What plays in Peoria may not, very assuredly will not, play in Phnom Penh. And eventually the temptation will arise to test some of these principles on the domestic population. After all, with whose mindset are we the most familiar but our own? What better place to test new theories of psychological warfare than among our native populace? And how better to control our population politically than through the judicious use of propaganda, using the robust media of the most turned on, tuned in, mentally massaged nation of the earth, the United States of America. I'm going to stop there. The next chapter we're going to read is Elimination by Illumination. We are continuing with the section of the book, Nazism, Satanism, and Psychological Warfare in the U.S. And there are several chapters under that part of the book. I am going to end it now. It seems like a good place to end. It's just a little over an hour so that it will be easily accessible. I'll put them in a playlist because, again, this is vital that you understand these tactics because this is what's happening now. A lot of the younger people, and I would give you a challenge if you're Gen X or older, go into some of these comment sections. See what the younger people are saying. Start making your comments your ministry. Start explaining how propaganda works to them. Just leave 1-2 word comments. Propaganda. This is a lie. This is deception. Whatever it is. I challenge you. Do that. Start helping in little ways. Do whatever you can do. I love you guys. Stay blessed. I don't like just showing you the dark things. This is why I try to highlight nature and God's creation. So if you'd like to see more of that or things that are personal to me like that, watch the regular video uploads and the shorts. If you can, say a prayer for me. That'd be great because I'm starting to feel feverish again. So I'm going to go and take a little rest, take my dogs out. And you guys have a blessed day, and we'll talk soon, hopefully, God willing. Bye, guys. Be wise. Remember, don't react, right? Don't respond. You only control yourself. You can't control anyone else's actions, but you can control how you react, or if you don't. So just don't.